Senator Steele-John.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. What is unfolding right now in Afghanistan is a humanitarian crisis that requires an urgent response. The Greens and the community are united in calling for a concrete set of tangible actions to be taken by the Australian government to support the people of Afghanistan, to show solidarity with them in this terrible moment of disaster and fear, and to support those Afghans living here in Australia. The Greens and the community are calling for immediate allocation of 20,000 additional humanitarian visas to be granted so that those in danger can come to safety. We are calling together with the community for the immediate conversion of temporary protection and shared visas to permanent visas so that those here in Australia are relieved from this constant state of limbo in which they have been forced to live by governments of all persuasions. We are calling for the immediate return of all Afghan refugees and asylum seekers from offshore detention to be processed here in the community and granted permanent visas. We are additionally calling for humanitarian assistance to the internally displaced peoples who are now fleeing what seems to be a rapidly unravelling civil war within the nation. We are doing all of these things at the urging of the community and are proud to be alongside them in solidarity and support in this very difficult time. It was an honour and a privilege to be able to gather with the community yesterday in WA at the same time as communities rallied across Australia to show their support for the people of Afghanistan in this moment. And there was a very clear message for everybody who attended, that the community here in Australia and community members across the country demand that the major parties, that the government, that state governments do all that they can to support Afghanistan, to support its people, to maintain rights and justice, and to use all the levers that Australia has to make sure that those human rights are upheld in Afghanistan. It is so important that Australia use its position in the world to make sure that any government that forms in Afghanistan is one which upholds the rights of women and girls, one which upholds the rights of children, and one which guarantees the human rights of ethnic minorities, whether they be Hazara, whether they be Pashtun, whether they be Turkic, or whether they be Uzbek. All human rights in Afghanistan must be upheld. These are the urgent, concrete actions which must be taken now, in addition to the continuation of evacuations of those on the ground in Afghanistan so that they are able to be brought to safety and that no one is left behind. As we take these urgent and concrete steps, it is also vitally important that the major parties, that prime ministers, that foreign ministers past and present reflect upon how Australia and Afghanistan ended up in this moment. There must be a full and honest reflection upon what has happened here. The crisis in Afghanistan, the return of the Taliban, is the latest in a series of failed experiments in wars of overseas violent intervention, participated in by Australia alongside the United States. From Vietnam to Iraq and now Afghanistan, Australia has repeatedly followed the United States into wars of aggression, with the result that many of our service personnel have died, many more have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands of civilian lives have been lost in those nations, if not millions more. There is an urgent need to recognize and to reckon with the reality that during the 20 years that our armed forces personnel were on country in Australia, there are credible allegations that there were many instances of war crimes committed by service personnel in that country. And we must reflect not only on the importance of holding individuals to account, but to also hold the chain of command to account, to hold the strategists to account, and to hold the political leaders to account who left our presence and our forces in Afghanistan to so dangerously drift without any discernible purpose into a context where some of the most heinous violations of the laws of war are now alleged to have taken place. We must reflect also on the urgent need to consider whether there would have been and would be in the future ways that we are able to promote human rights globally that do not involve doing so at the end of a gun. And that if ever the people of Australia are called upon to take up arms or to deploy overseas, that only occurs after a vote of this Parliament. No Australian service personnel member should be asked to put their lives on the line for a cause for which no MP has been prepared to vote. All of these things must be done urgently to support community and to translate the very fine and comforting words that are so easily now spoken by members of the major parties into concrete actions. We cannot have a situation where debates are held in the Senate or in the House of Representatives where members give contributions singing the praises of armed forces personnel, committing Australia to supporting the people of Afghanistan, while there is also a failure to translate those words into those concrete actions for which the community are calling. And I say again, there must be 20,000 humanitarian visa places issued specifically for those from Afghanistan. There must be the conversion of temporary protection visas and SHIV visas to permanent visa status so that healthcare, education and supports can be accessed. There must be the continuation of evacuations for those who supported the Australian mission in Afghanistan and also for those who are additionally at risk, for the journalists, for the academics, for the MPs, for the activists that are now at risk from the Taliban. And there must be a use of our position in the world to ensure that any government which forms in Afghanistan is one which upholds the rights of women, children, girls and ethnic minorities. All this must be done out of recognition that the moment that Afghanistan now finds itself in is a moment to which Australia has contributed. We are not passive actors in this crisis. There was a decision made by the political leadership of this country to follow the United States into that conflict, into this war, which has claimed so many Afghani, Hazara, Pashtun, Uzbek and Turkic lives, that has claimed so many lives of our Defence Force personnel, that have wounded so many. Those were political decisions that were made by Australian political leaders, and those leaders must now take those concrete actions, live up to their obligations, and